In section 4.2, we're going to look at one of the more common ways to collect data, which is through the use of surveys. Surveys are very common. In fact, if you ever go on vacation or stay at a hotel, often once you check out, you will get a survey through email from the hotel or the resort asking you about how comfortable your room was and what you thought about the service and the restaurant and so on. So, what we're going to do is look at some examples with surveys and try to identify some potential problems that could occur. What I would recommend that you do is to kind of read through these after you pause the video and jot down some ideas about what you notice could potentially go wrong with each of these surveys. And then also try to think about whether each of these surveys will either over or underestimate the value that they're trying to get by administering the survey. And then go ahead and turn the video back on and see how you did. Example number 1 says the mayor of Springfield is interested in finding out the average age of people in the city. He obtains a list of all the landline telephones in the city and then contacts a simple random sample of 300 people. He uses the data from the sample to estimate the average age of all the people in the city. Now, one thing you might have noticed right away that could go wrong with this survey is that not everyone has a landline phone. So there are some people in the city that can't even be contacted to be part of the survey. And typically, it's older people maybe that have landline phones in their house still. Usually, when we build new houses, people have cell phones. A lot of times, they don't put landline phones in anymore. So it's generally only older people that have them. Because of that, this will probably lead to an overestimate. If he's only calling the older people in the town and he's averaging their ages together, he's going to get an estimate of the average age that's too high because he's not able to use everyone. In statistics, this is what we refer to as undercoverage because we're leaving some people out. In example 2, it says the administration at a high school wants to know the proportion of students that did all of their homework last night. They select a simple random sample of 100 students and they send an email to each of them asking if they did all their homework. They got 40 responses, and of those 40, 36 of the students said that they did all their homework last night, and 36 out of 40 is 90%. Now, one thing that's wrong with the survey is that it got very few replies, right? We only got 40 out of 100, which is not ideal, but that's very common in surveys. This is probably going to lead to an overestimate because I'm imagining that the people who replied are probably the ones that did their homework. The ones that didn't do their homework probably aren't going to take the time to reply. It could also be that of the ones that did reply, maybe some of them weren't 100% honest about it. Now, this is an issue in statistics that we call non-response. And that happens very often too. You might get surveys through email or in the mail, and you just choose not to participate. It's not that people can't be reached, it's just that they decide they don't want to participate. Example number 3 says Boy Scout Peter M. wants to know the proportion of people in his neighborhood who support the Boy Scouts. He takes a random sample of 30 homes and he visits them dressed in his uniform. What's wrong with this survey is that people aren't always going to be honest when they are approached with face-to-face interviews. And in this case, because Peter is dressed in his Boy Scout uniform, that might lead people to answer a certain way because they don't want to hurt his feelings and say that they don't support the Boy Scouts because they know he is a Boy Scout. It's a lot harder to be mean to people face to face than it is through an anonymous survey. So this will probably again lead to an overestimate because people are going to feel bad about telling Peter they don't support the Boy Scouts. So they might say they do when they really don't. In statistics, we refer to this as response bias. Finally, example number 4 says a marketing firm mails a survey to all the homes in a small town. Included in the survey is a question that says, do you think taxes should be raised on cigarettes, even though it unfairly targets the rights of a group of people to engage in an activity that they find enjoyable? What's wrong with this survey is that the question is sort of one-sided. It's kind of already pulling people to think about the fact that taxes are unfair. And in fact, here we're just taxing one group of people, which are the smokers. And so because the question is sort of directing them to answer in a certain way, that causes some problems with the survey. Because of this, we would probably say underestimate, right? If they're trying to get an idea of whether taxes should be raised on cigarettes, and the question is making people think that these taxes are unfair, The question is sort of hinting at the fact that they should say no to these new taxes, right? And this is in statistics what we call a leading question, because the wording of the question is kind of directing people to answer the way that you want them to answer. So, what we've seen here are some examples of bias in surveys. And there are several sources of bias that can occur. Sometimes we might even have more than one in a particular survey or in a question. So, now we're going to define each of them a little bit more formally. So, undercoverage happens when the sampling method we pick makes it impossible for some people to be able to participate. For example, calling landline phones only. Since not everybody has a landline phone, not everybody would be able to participate in the survey. Non response is when we choose people, but they either can't be reached or they choose not to participate. And an example of this would be receipt surveys. If you go to fast food restaurants, you may notice that a lot of times the receipt will say something like at the bottom, "What did you think of your food today?" And they'll give you a lot of times a QR code to scan or something like that, inviting you to log in and fill out a survey. And everybody gets those receipts with the surveys on them. Most people just throw the receipts away and choose not to participate. And oftentimes, the ones that do participate are the ones that have very strong opinions. So, if you get some food from Subway and it is really, really bad, you might be inclined to actually take the time to take the survey. But if you just get your usual sandwich and it tastes fine, you're probably not going to go out of your way to complete that survey. Response bias occurs when the surveyor influences the responses of the people because of what they look like, what they say, etc., or people lie to avoid looking bad. And this happens a lot of time in face-to-face surveys, right? Especially if maybe you are easily influenced by the gender or the race or something about the person, especially if it's related to the topic of the survey. Finally, we discuss leading questions, which are where you have questions that are worded with terms or phrases that try to sway respondents one way or the other. And it's really difficult actually to write questions that are not leading questions. But oftentimes, we want to try to do that as much as possible so that it's not the wording that causes the results that we're looking for in our survey. Please do the homework for section 4.2 in your assignment packet.